Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Fresh sanctions for additional senior officials undermining Guyana's democracy. This story takes the lead in our 911th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday, 3rd August 2020. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. One day after the Court of Appeal dismissed the case brought before it by Messenger Jones, the US is again threatening to unleash more sanctions on senior officials who seek to undermine democracy in Guyana. Wendell Badri of HGP Nightly News reports.
While Guyanese await a declaration of a president 151 days after casting their ballots, more sanctions have been levied against additional senior officials of Guyana by the United States, who, according to the Acting Assistant Secretary for U.S. Department of State's Bureau for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Michael Kozak, are responsible for or are complicit in undermining democracy in the country. The statement came to light via teleconference at a special briefing on the U.S. administration's efforts to promote democracy in the Western Hemisphere. The statement by the U.S. Department reads, on July 15, the Secretary announced the imposition of visa restrictions on individuals responsible for or complicit in undermining democracy in Guyana. Today, Thursday, we are acting to prevent additional senior individuals from that country, Guyana, from entering the United States. The Granger administration and its allies continue to defy the will of the Guyanese people by refusing to accept the vote recount. The count has been certified as valid by international observers, OAS, and CARICOM, Guyana's and the Caribbean's highest courts. The United States joins the rest of the region in refusing to go along with this farce. We will continue to act until the Granger administration accepts the will of the Guyanese voters. This statement comes just one day after the Court of Appeal unanimously dismissed the case brought before it by the APNU AFC, seeking to overturn the ruling of the Chief Justice, Madam Roxanne George, who had ruled that the recount figures were credible enough to be used as basis for a declaration of the results of the 2020 elections held on March 2nd. The APNU AFC were in disagreement, citing that Order 60 of 2020 and Section 22 of the Election Laws Amendment Act were in tension with the Constitution on the basis of separation of powers and therefore challenged the ruling via the Court of Appeal. Also reiterating his call for a declaration of the results of the 2020 elections to be announced soon is the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, who, via Twitter, posited, the right of appeal is a privilege that should not be abused, especially in deferring the will of the people. Guyana has spoken. GCOM must declare results based on the recount. Just recently, a number of countries called on the incumbent administration to concede and allow for the transition of power in a peaceful and democratic manner. On the heels of the case dismissal by the Court of Appeal, the President, David Granger, via a press statement had said he will stand by the ruling of the court as well as the decision of the elections body in declaring a winner. Meanwhile, senior party member of the coalition, Joseph Harmon, who also released a statement subsequent to the court's ruling, made it pellucid that the coalition is firm in its position that only valid votes must be counted and used to form a declaration of results. The multi-party coalition had been sounding their voices, asserting that the 2020 election was marred in fraud, which was only uncovered through the national recount exercise. The country now awaits results 151 days later in the face of a growing pandemic. Wendell Badri for HGP Nightly News.
Still on Guyana and from HGP Nightly News, former GDF Captain Daniel C. Ram is adamant that only valid votes should be used for a declaration of results, while also stating that GCOM is to share the blame for the current electoral impasse in the country. Wendell Badri again reports.
Former Guyana Defense Force GDF Captain Daniel C. Ram has stated that he is not surprised by the Court of Appeal's ruling in a discussion on Benchcop Radio with host Mark Benchcop on Thursday evening. The captain and host were at the time discussing the state of the electoral process in the country. CRAM, in addressing issues related to Order 60 of 2020, which activated the national recount exercise, expressed the view that the order should either be used in its entirety or not at all.
My take on it is that you either use Order 60 in its entirety, which will satisfy all Guyanese, rather than partially, which will only satisfy one party or one stakeholder in these election processes.
CRAM's party, the APNU AFC, has been contending that Order 60 of 2020 is unconstitutional and therefore could not be upheld as a valid order. The party further contested that other parties and their agents who contested the 2020 elections have been pushing for one aspect of the order to be upheld while ignoring another key element of the order. Order 60 of 2020 was agreed to by His Excellency and the leader of the opposition and had been drafted by the Elections Commission with the intervention of a high-level CARICOM team, which mediated at the onset of claims of irregularities by the PPPC and other stakeholders. The order sought to nullify or eradicate any doubts that had arisen in relation to the electoral process and undertook the counting of all ballots cast in the March 2nd election at the Artichon Conference Center over a period of 33 days. At the end of the exercise, figures reflected the PPPC in the lead with 233,336 votes and the APNU AFC trailing with 217,920 votes. But the APNU AFC maintained the claims of fraud, asserting that if only valid votes are counted, it would win. The former army captain believes that his party's main political opponent, the PPPC, is not the only agency that should carry the burden of the blame for the current electoral impasse, but also the elections body itself, comprising the chairperson, commissioners, and others.
I share the same view, but this is not only the PPP. This is the commission chair, all the commissioners that sit there, right? Who are sitting there to allow these atrocities to unfold right before the eyes of the Guyanese public. I would not say, right, that hey, something is wrong here. The chairperson is on record many times stating that there's fraud. The entire recount was littered with fraud.
Co-campaign manager of the coalition party, Joseph Harmon, had previously stated that fraud was uncovered during the national recount exercise, and this was brought to the attention of GCOM, which had agreed to examine same. The chairperson of GCOM, however, in asking the chief elections officer, Keith Lowenfield, to prepare a report for a declaration of results, had requested of him to compile that report using the tally of votes from the national recount exercise, which the coalition party has repeatedly said is marred in fraud. The PPPC, along with several minority parties, have all stated that the coalition needs to produce evidence of fraud and that these allegations ought to be addressed via an election petition. The matter was extensively litigated and adjudicated by several courts, including Guyana's apex court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, all of which have upheld both Order 60 and the national recount as being credible and valid. Several countries have also thrown their support behind the recount figures, citing that it is credible and was observed by a number of authorized officials in a transparent manner. CRAM continued with his tirade questioning the rationality of swearing in a government that could be deemed as illegitimate given the circumstances surrounding the declaration.
Our commissioners were the first persons to make the most legitimate have the most legitimate of reasoning and saying, let's go for a non-declaration or if we can nullify these elections. Yet no one wanted to nullify the elections because of fraud. They prefer to go back to the fraud numbers and try, and I say try because they're trying very hard to swear in a government illegitimately.
Mr. CRAM, in preferring his party's position, expressed that valid votes only must be counted.
I will tell you that our party stands firm on the basis that no government will be sworn into office based on fraudulent votes. Only valid votes. Valid votes that lead to a final credible count, which lead to a legitimate declaration.
Wendell Badgery for HGP Nightly News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
Travis Chase of HGP Nightly News tells us that High and Cowan Streets, Kingston, will be the center of attention again as commissioners of the Guyana Elections Commission would have met on Sunday. In the meantime, the president is insisting on credibility.
His Excellency President David Granger is making it clear again that he cannot step aside or concede until a declaration has been made by the Guyana Elections Commission. This is in light of groundswell of calls for him to do so.
I cannot concede because no declaration has been made. I pay attention to what the popular media say, but as far as the groundswell is concerned, everybody knows that for the last 20 months I've been saying over and over again that I will abide by the declaration by the Election Commission. I will abide by the rulings of the court. People can rightfully challenge the ruling if they disagree with it, but once the court has finally ruled, we will obey the ruling of the court.
Contacted on Friday, Public Relations Officer for the Guyana Elections Commission, Yolanda Ward, told Nightly News that Chairman of the Commission, Justice Claudette Singh, has dispatched emails to the commissioners asking them to indicate their availability for a meeting on Sunday at 10 a.m. Whatever the outcome of that meeting, the president insists on credibility.
What I have insisted on is credibility. Other people have been making calls. I know what I've said. I've said that I'm interested in having, as early as possible, a declaration by the chairman of the commission. And I don't run the elections. The chairman of the commission and 6 commissioners will determine the outcome of this process.
As the elections debacle continues, the Court of Appeal on Thursday dismissed an appeal filed by Messinga Jones, who asked the court to compel the Guyana Elections Commission to utilize the 10 declarations by the returning officers as the basis for announcing the winner of the March 2020 elections.
The groundswell is not a legitimate statement of what the law or the Constitution calls for. I follow the Constitution, I follow what the courts have said, and I await the decision of the Commission. I cannot follow the groundswell.
Travis Chase, HGP Nightly News.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.